Hello, everybody. I just pulled over on the side of the road to do an intro because holy smokes, look at these rocks. I don't even know what I'm looking at here. This is just incredible. I was driving by it. I was like, what the? I'm driving from Prescott, Arizona. Just started making my way to Vegas, putting together some really awesome projects. More on that hopefully soon. By the way, today we're going to be talking all about ants and cooperation with Noah Penter-Willman at UCLA, who is a fantastic conversation. I'm going to tell you more. I know you guys, a lot of you are like, I came here for the ants. I don't care what rocks you're standing by in this long-winded intro. I think I like you guys the most. The ones just itching for the ant knowledge so much that you can't stand it, that I'm telling you a little bit about my life and showing you some interesting things that I have going on. There's I guess this is Granite Park or something. I want to say it's got the word granite in it. So I don't know anything about geology at all. You want to know how little I know about geology? I'm standing here in Granite something Park. Yeah, I don't know if I'm looking at granite right now. I think that I must be, given the name. If it weren't for the name, I would have been like, I don't know what kind of rocks those cool ass rocks are. And my father has had a countertop business working with granite. I've worked with granite I'm also big into rock climbing. The texture of the rock, incredibly important. And a lot of rock climbers like really know their rocks and different. I have no clue. I'm gonna guess, because of the name, that I'm looking at some granite right now. All right? Probably looking at some granite. How much would I bet? $10 for sure. I'd bet $100 that, I mean, there's some interesting. I would maybe. I'm heading to Vegas, so I'm in a gambling mood. I would maybe bet $1,000 that these awesome rocks are granite. Whatever they are, is just making me realize how much more wonderful and interesting my life is going to be once I start learning to identify a little bit of some aspects of geology one day. That's what Insanely Curious is all about, is filling in those gaps and discovering new treasures of knowledge, like this episode today, which is not so much just a random episode where we're learning about ants and cooperation and some of the building blocks of social cooperation, that also has things to say about cooperative species such as humans. Believe it or not, we can be fairly cooperative. And it has to say with a lot of bigger ideas that I'm actually putting together for a show. I have a few different shows that I'm working on, and one that I'm really excited about is very related to many of the principles that we're talking about in today's show. How complexity can emerge from kind of smaller, simpler processes and lead on up to entire civilizations and cooperation and wars and all these really fascinatingly complex subjects that start from putting together a whole bunch of little more, we'll put in quotes, simpler type of life and processes. And so more on that. I'm looking like August in Knoxville, probably, for that show. Probably locking that in real soon. In the meantime, you can check out this episode. Noah's an incredible guest, and kind of get a little taste of some bigger ideas to come. And Shane the Curious, I'm not just um, doing one-off interviews as much as really trying to utilize the opportunities that I have to talk with some of these incredible people and incredible minds, and create new shows and build stories around some of these incredible subjects that are just off the radar, like these rocks. Like learning about these rocks, totally off the radar for me. Now I'm here. I need to learn more about these rocks, and there's it's just life is endlessly fascinating and curious to me, and I want to be a comedian talking about fascinating, interesting, curious things, not the run-of-the-mill, mundane subjects that are generally out there. So I hope you appreciate a little bit of a background on the journey. I hope that makes you that much more interested in following along with this show and the multiple episodes, as you'll get to see me one day in your city doing a show, putting a bunch of these interesting ideas together. And today, you're just going to learn a lot about life. You think this is just about ants? Not a chance. But we're going to. This guy needs to get better at stopping while he's ahead, huh? I sincerely, I really hope you enjoy this episode. Please subscribe to wherever you're watching this. Sorry, I don't put any effort into marketing or anything. I will in the future. I'm just waiting for my special to be complete so that we can sell it and start the marketing ball rolling there. And I just don't have bandwidth until that time. So right now you get to be one of the cool kids discovering a thing before anyone else does, and then later on in this year, once I start firing up all the live shows again, we're all gonna have a lot more friends in this community, and you guys will be the founders that will get to welcome all of the newcomers as we build a little ant-like civilization of curiosity around us. So enjoy today's episode. Well, Noah, thanks for having me here and the lab tour and everything. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Noah Pinter-Woolman. I'm a professor in the ecology and evolutionary biology at UCLA, and I study animal behavior, specifically ants.
Specifically ants.
Yeah.
And why? What about ants is valuable to study? Just how to get these things off of your kitchen table, or is there?
Well, that is the most common question I get whenever someone's like, "Oh, you study ants? Ooh, I have ants in my kitchen. What should I do?" So I definitely get those questions, but mostly they're a distributed system. So the ants are the ants themselves are a distributed system. So
distributed, okay.
Yeah, it's basically a collective organism that we can actually follow the different parts of the organism. So we have the colony itself is the unit on which natural selection acts, and so colonies make more colonies, whereas ants, all the ants you see in your kitchen, they don't make more ants because they're all sterile female workers. So the queen is the only one who can lay eggs, and she can produce more queens who will then create more colonies. So basically natural selection acts at the level of the colony, but then we have all these little ants doing stuff, and together they basically produce these collective colony behaviors. And so that's why I like studying them, because I think it's really fascinating to see how you get these kind of emergent properties, these more complicated behaviors from the little components. And we have that everywhere. We have that, our brain does that, right? All these neurons working together, and then thoughts and words come out. But with neurons, it's much harder to see what each individual neuron is doing each and every moment of the process. Whereas with ants, we can actually like look at what each individual does and see how what the components do kind of translate into what the collective ends up doing. So it's kind of a good system to study these kind of emergent properties and potentially say, oh, ants follow these certain algorithms, and maybe other complex systems like brains or cities or whatever we want, whatever complex system we're thinking about might have some shared rules. And so that's kind of one fun things I think about ants, and an application that is relevant to other systems beyond ants. And then they're just fun to look at.
Yeah. So how do you get from kind of, if you're looking at, say, a neuron, and then you really sit and tease apart the different kind of criteria a neuron is using to see it has some certain action potential where enough transmitters are attaching to these dendrites, the receiving side, enough that it reaches a certain level that then it goes, okay, let's fire, and then it sends a signal out. And then, and I think you can kind of show someone that, and they would get a sense of what's going on enough, like pretty quickly. And then figuring out how to go from that to a pattern of neurons. So when this neuron goes off, it activates these other ones that activate these neural loops that then end up ultimately expressing themselves in this fancy language stuff we're very proud of, or these behaviors that we do. How in the world, and is that kind of how, like when you say emergence, is that sort of?
Yeah, so emergence is the idea that you put two things together and you get something more than what you thought you would get. So basically the sum being bigger, the whole being bigger than the sum of the parts. That's the idea of emergence. Basically, you know how one thing will behave, you know how the other will behave, you put them together and something bigger comes out. And so with ants, like if you follow the neuron example that you just did, we have actually a similar process happening. So when they are looking for food, for example, so not all the ants go outside because it's really dangerous to leave your nest. I mean, there's predators, there's sun, there's all these things that you could die from. So most of the ants actually stay inside the nest, and only foragers, which are certain ants that it depends on which species we're talking about. Usually it's older ants that kind of get that job of bringing food. And so they leave, they find food, and then they come back with the food, which then gets distributed. But whether or not they recruit other ants is actually a matter of how they interact with the others. So there's all these ants kind of sitting and waiting in the nest, and they wait for returning foragers to come back with food. And if they bump into enough returning foragers, they themselves will be activated and go out. So here we have something very similar to the neurons you described, where an ant is inactive until she sensed enough interactions with successful foragers, and she's like, oh, there's something good out there, I'm going to go out, and then she'll go out and forage. And so then the kind of emergent property is the colony itself is foraging. We have these beautiful trails that they follow, and they control whether, basically these little kind of localized interactions control if the colony is actively foraging or not. And the colony itself basically regulates this depending on how hot it is outside, whether there's evil predators waiting to eat you. And so these like local interactions kind of result in these emergent patterns of collective foraging.
Yeah, so I'll go out foraging after this conversation, and I'm UCLA campus here. I'm a very nice area. I always love visiting, and let's say I'm not gonna use Google Maps and search best route. I'm just gonna kind of drive and look for, there's indicators of food sources. Absolutely. But then I might kind of look for the social proof stuff. I might go like, well, that place has a line.
Exactly.
This other place seems empty.
Yeah.
Like, well, that would be convenient, but there's something in there indicating to me that this is the place with the line might have the better food.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's actually just an indicator that it's a line that started like rather arbitrarily.
Yeah,
And
maybe they're really slow at giving the food. Mm-hmm. I mean, that would be, I guess you can call it, like you would be following certain rules, and then the emergent property is basically the lines that form at certain places. Basically, because, for example, people are like, "Oh, I'm going to follow and go stand in line." So that will make the line longer, or maybe it is advertised that this is really good food, and so they'll have other cues that bring people and attract them. So I think the kind of emergent property there would be the actual line and like the actual popularity of a certain place.
It was just St. Patrick's Day. Probably Irish places were a little busier at that time. There's various kind of ecological factors in an ever-shifting environment.
Yeah, and social insects do that too. I mean, honeybees is one of the more kind of famous example where they actually kind of vote on a place. When they look for a new nest to move into, they'll basically patrollers or scouts will visit different places, and they'll come back and kind of advertise to the others and be like, oh, this is a really good place. It's in this direction, and I'm really excited about that. And over time, you'll actually see that bees will kind of follow different individuals depending on the dance that they performed, and then they end up converging on one specific place. And so there's examples with ants that kind of they have to choose between different nests, and they'll lead other individuals, and they'll converge on the nest that's the most suitable for them, like the darker with the smaller entrance and stuff like that. So you definitely see these kind of collective decision making happen. And again, it's each individual ant needs to decide what it's going to do, and then in the end, the whole colony ends up moving. So there's some quorum sensing and kind of thresholding, like enough ants or enough bees are going to a certain place, so we're all going to follow them. So we definitely see that in the insect world as well.
What kind of emergent properties of a colony are seemingly convergent, and where do you see more variety? Like say some ants happen to find themselves in some shipping box in South America and inadvertently find themselves in some new land, and then there's these founding effects where you kind of inadvertently had this small sample size, so there might be more that this region might have given rise to like a more homogeneous
like a
kind
genetic
of
bottleneck.
And that kind of is selected for, and when there's variation, it gets selected out a little bit, but then some of these individual differences go out and they're in a new ecological system, and think that you would suspect that you go 100,000 generations later or something like that that these populations look very very different.
Yeah.
But I imagine there'd be some things that are still similar.
Yeah, that are conserved. One of my favorite emergent properties of ants are their nests, and so just the structure of the nests that they build. So, for example, if you have like the Argentine ants you were referring to who came to a different place, the structure of the nests in the new land will probably be very similar to the structures of the nests where they came from. But there's going to be all sorts of environmental features that will influence whether or not they can build the nest the way that they do. So one of the things we look at in my lab is basically kind of how much of the environment influences this emergent outcome, which is the nest itself and its structure, and how much of it is kind of a matter of the ants and what they do. Like whether certain ants that forage in a certain way will have specific structures, whereas other ants that forage in a different way will have different structures depending on whether or not they need to recruit each other from the nest. And so, in species that are coming into a new place, there are some kind of inherent species-specific patterns of nest structure, because each ant will kind of follow the rule of like, I'm going to remove a piece of dirt from this if I see my friend remove a piece of dirt, or like I'll count 3 pieces of dirt before you can make up a lot of rules. But in any case, there are species-specific structures, but then they're also shaped by what's in the soil. Like if there's a rock, you're going to have to go around the rock, regardless of whether or not you wanted to dig a tunnel or a chamber there. So it's kind of a combination of both of these things, both kind of the nature-nurture, right? What you have around you, what you come with. And so, again, some of these like local rules or like the things that ants do are inherent, and even if they do move from one place to another, will probably be very similar. But then if they're faced with different pressures, then some will get selected and some will not. And
I would think that, I can easily imagine that if you're in the tunnel digging business, that the type of soil, how much rain there is, the temperature is going to make a huge impact, on the kind of structures.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see a little bit of environmental effects on certain features, but still a lot of times, like even if you have many different species all digging in the same place, you'll still get different structures. They won't all make the exact same tunnels. One, because the ants themselves are different sizes, and that could matter because you need to make the tunnel wide enough for you to move through, but you don't want to make it too wide because that's a waste of energy.
Just enough for the biggest ones to...
Yeah, actually we find that it's the body length that really matters. So we thought it was the head, because like this is how much I can dig, and I need to
be able to turn around.
No, but you need to turn around, exactly. So actually, it is correlated.
I've been caving, so I know some of those constraints.
And they actually told this to some people in transportation, and they're like, "Well, that that's why ambulances are the size that they are, or fire trucks are the size that they are, and that's why fire trucks are bigger in the United States than in Europe, because the roads in Europe are smaller." And they need to be able to turn around. So I was like, yes, ants are like fire trucks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. But
then you need to have a fire truck specifically needs like rear end steering or something like that. So then certain needs and environments might be shaping some of the evolution of an individual as well.
A certain individual in its lifetime.
I always like when I get a hold on there.
Evolution doesn't work on an individual's lifetime, but on a species, yes.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, like it would. Certain conditions will morph what future individuals may, what adaptations,
right? What gets selected and what doesn't, and what survives and what does not. So
right.
Yeah. But again, and so there could be certain adaptations to certain environments over time. There could also be just like acclimation. So if there's a rainy, if rain is coming and it's breaking your nest, you're going to have to fix it in a certain way. So even, throughout development, you'll shift and change the structure of the nest a little bit. Again, in certain ways that depend on what you have to work with. But yeah, I think it can happen at both levels. And clearly there's a reason why we have so much variation in the ant world. And it has to do with a lot of things, including what is the environment in which they evolved, what are the collective outcomes that they need to have in order to survive and make more colonies, right? So if there's a certain structure that allows them to be really efficient at foraging, for example, then maybe those structures are going to be favored, and those are going to be passed down to the next colony, and the ones that didn't have really good structures are just not going to produce as many baby colonies as the other ones. So
yeah, and then you find yourself next to a volcano or on a fault line or something like that, and under the best of circumstances, right. Well, it was you're better off being the dummies that built some
It's true.
colony in a worse place, but
Yeah.
far away from where that bad luck happened.
Absolutely, or a wildfire, right? I mean,
Right.
a lot of the ants we study are in the grasslands here in California, and we actually, one of our field site, half of it burned last year, and there's a lot of ants. So we're going to go and check and see what happens after your whole field gets burned. So
Right,
it's one of the
right.
things we're exploring these days.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, it's ants are so interesting to examine all this because you're just throwing so many. You're throwing numbers at a situation. You get such large sample sizes.
Yeah.
So quickly and relatively. I guess I didn't realize that they're like what's an ant generation? Like what would you
Right.
consider the length of an ant
Right.
generation?
So-
Depending on the species, I suppose.
Yeah. So again, if you think, for example, about harvester ants, a worker will last about a year or so, but the queen can last for like 40 years. So some of
That's-
Deborah Gordon's work on harvester ants in the deserts in Arizona, she's been following the same colonies for decades now, and so we know that ants can be, that queens can be as old as us.
Do they do the like they only mate once
Yep.
with like multiple males? Because honeybees
Yep,
do
they
that
do.
as well, right? And then what's the
Yeah.
other thing that they're equally related to?
Wasps.
Wasps,
Yeah.
bees, and
And ants, yeah. are
maybe
heming
it
up.
was wasps that came first.
I think so.
Yeah.
You're
Okay.
putting me on the
Yeah.
spot here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, no one could know every single little detail at
Yeah,
any
right.
given moment.
Right.
But what's to put you on the spot again? How ballpark? How long have ants been on
Oh my
Earth?
goodness. I don't know. Like 100 million? Around 100 million years, I think.
Oh,
Maybe. I think that's.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not.
They've been
it's
around for a while.
yeah,
The
that's
evolution has acted on them for a billion. I hope.
Interesting. Yeah, that's I don't think anyone's going to be too terribly upset if they Google that, find out you're 20 billion years off, and then
20
your
million's
colleagues
right
might give you a hard time for a week. So ants are. There's some of these fun statistics of something like 20% of the biomass on Earth. I generally think of humans as the species that's got covered as much territory and been able to adapt to as many conditions, and that's true. But ants really give us a run for
they do a good
our
job,
money, depending on how you. I mean, they're on like basically every continent.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're on Antarctica, but
Yeah.
because that's a bit tough. Maybe inside the buildings of people.
Yeah,
There might be some carpenter ants there. But yeah, they are on every continent in the world. So, and they've been around for a while. So yeah, they again, as kind of like us, they're also big societies, right? They have a lot to work with. There's a lot of individuals that can get things done, like you can dig these nests or you can build stuff, and they have all sorts of very creative things that they do, like they cultivate fungus, for example. So they're agriculturists, right? They probably came up with agriculture way before us. Like leafcutter ants, people always think, oh, they're bringing the leaves because they're going to eat the leaves. No, they use the leaves to cultivate fungus, and then they eat the fungus. Or like they herd other insects around. They'll move aphids on a plant, like the Argentine ants that we study here. They're herders, so they eat the sap from plants, and they can't extract it themselves. They'll have aphids do it for them, and then they'll basically drink up the honeydew from the aphids, and they'll kind of move the aphids around on the tree or the plant to make sure that they're getting the highest yield. So you can think of them as herders. So they've evolved a lot of different ways that we think, oh, we're the agriculturists and herders, but actually ants did it before us.
That's really interesting. Well, because humans were, not.
Yeah,
You wouldn't bet on humans for much of human history.
that's true.
And then it wasn't until we started accruing
Hmm.
the numbers
Yeah,
that then things like agriculture
agricultural revolution.
eventually became even after we had the numbers, it took a
Hmm.
while before
Yeah,
agriculture really started happening in the way that we think about it today, it seems like.
absolutely.
And so there's something to this numbers stuff. Why haven't more
Hmm.
species uh, gotten this colony stuff
Well, first of all, there
down?
are about 10,000 species of ants. So we have a
Okay.
lot of ant species, and they've, figured out a lot of different ways to be successful, because each species is a little bit different and has its own kind of way to figure out the world and
Yeah.
take over it. But I mean, other animals. So I think one of the things that makes ants well, not unique, but successful, is their sociality. So basically the idea that a lot of individuals work together, and a little bit like with humans, we build these cities by a lot of people doing a lot of stuff. And so I think that idea that basically the colony works as a unit and kind of accomplishes things collectively has been a very successful thing, and you need certain conditions to get at that. And there's a lot of hypotheses for what makes animals work together in kind of an altruistic way where they help each other, and things like relatedness. So one idea that used to be prevalent is that a lot of these workers are just very, very closely related because, like you said before, the queen will go out, mate once, and then dig in the nest and basically have produce these workers for entire life. So they're all sisters in the sense that they come from the same queen, but they could have different fathers because the queen mates with multiple males. And also, there's a lot of species with multiple queens. So sometimes you will get colonies that have more than one queen. So they might not be sisters. So that's kind of one. It could work for some of them. The high relatedness.
So
Is
the like band of sisters, so to speak, is perhaps even tighter because there's a closer genetic relatedness. So if you have something, what are what's it called, like super sisters or
So
what,
they're
super siblings
they're
or something?
haplodiploid. Right. So hymenopterans are haplodiploid, which means that the females are diploid and males are haploid, which means females have two copies of their chromosomes and males have only one copy of their chromosomes. So basically, when a queen lays an egg, she basically can kind of decide whether it's going to be a fertilized egg or a non-fertilized egg. And so if she lays a non-fertilized egg, it's a haploid egg. It has only half the amount of genes that's kind of it has only one copy, and it actually will turn into a male. So it'll develop into a male. Whereas if she lays an egg that is fertilized, it'll develop into a female, and that can be either a female worker or a female queen.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, that also kind of, if you do the math, that makes the sisters even kind of slightly closer because again, we can do the math if you want, but it works better with if there's only one male who mated with a queen, then it would make the workers basically 75% related to one another, and which is more than the 50%.
I mean, by a
that we have.
long shot,
Yeah.
if you think about, if you think about like a cousin being an eighth,
Yes.
and
Sibling.
then a sibling a half and
Yeah.
parents a half, and you
Right.
think about, so then there's like, okay, so we can all have a sense of the
Right.
sort of bonding that seems to
Right.
elicit, but then there's like little variables, like, okay, this sibling seems like they have a little more going on, or like maybe this cousin has like a couch that I can crash at when I'm in town. This I get to be a cousin that they can talk about was just on TV or something.
Right.
There might be like some other like little nuanced factors on that
Right.
50%, but another 25%, like that's
Yeah. Yep.
That's an
a lot.
insane amount of
Again,
motivation
the math
mathematically.
the math breaks down a little bit because when you have multiple males mating and when you have multiple queens. So,
Right,
but I
right.
think the bottom line is that over the course of evolution, it happens that individuals that helped each other, those groups did better than groups where everyone fought each other. And how the groups are formed, whether it's because it was relatives that hung out together and then they were like, oh, the ones where they helped each other and the collective outcomes were better than the groups where everyone was infighting and just weren't able to get anything done. Now, the thing is, if you have a group of all nice people helping each other, it's very easy to invade and be one mean person and kind of destroy everything.
There's exploiters.
So it's much easier to invade that and kind of destroy the niceness. But at the group level, if you manage to avoid those evil individuals destroying your peaceful kumbaya group that works together, a group that does work together does better than groups that like everyone is off on their own and has to fend for themselves and fight with each other. Again, it doesn't work in every system, and getting those conditions where individuals will actually work together and collaborate and cooperate requires probably other things like, for example, cost of dispersal is one thing that's been used to explain, for example, eusocial behavior in the only eusocial mammals. So naked mole rats are these, mole rats that live underground, and they're also kind of like ants in the sense that there's a queen and a king in that sense because they're not haplodiploid, they're diploid. But they also have workers and they all work together. And for example, in that species, they live underground, and so they dig these tunnels, and their food are these big tubers that they eat, and it's really hard to get to because you need to find them. They're underground, and once you find it, everyone can eat it. Like they can live in their food for a while, and so these conditions have kind of resulted in these social groups that work together to dig tunnels, and individuals kind of giving up their ability to reproduce because it's just too costly to disperse and go off and find your own food and start digging your own nest and so on. So we see it in other taxa, not just in the hymenopterans, not just in the ant species wasps.
How much like freeloading or like policing or what can be observed in colonies?
So we see we see that in honeybees, for example. There's a bunch of examples, but one example is honeybees where the workers are actually not completely sterile, so they can actually still lay eggs. And since they're not fertilized, they're going to lay eggs that will turn into drones. So each worker in the hive, in the colony that lives in the hive, could potentially lay an egg. And usually, like when the queen is there, she'll emit a pheromone that basically kind of prevents them from doing that. And so when the queen dies, for example, you'll actually start seeing a lot of drone cells. So you'll see a lot of workers basically laying haploid eggs that then turn into males after the queen dies because she's no longer suppressing that behavior. And then while the queen is there, not only is there her pheromone that suppresses it, but there's also like actual bees that go around and kind of if someone try to sneak a male egg, they'll take it and eat it. So there's a little bit of that. There's also between species sometimes where some species will take advantage of others. You see that a lot in ants where certain species will go and kind of steal larvae from another species, raise them, kind of convince them that they're their own, and then those ants will then do all the hard work, like they'll go forage and they'll do all the dangerous things. So they kind of, with the pheromones that they're exposed to during development, they'll think they're part of the colony, even though they're not. So,
yeah, I mean, the big question is what are these? Why are all these ants working so hard when none of them are getting laid? What's going on? That's unusual. It's a lot of
right.
Most species, that's like a pretty central focus.
Right. Yeah.
of a lot of navigating their existence.
Yeah.
And with ants, there's so many that are just never
Gonna
going to have
produce.
the opportunity or even attempt to
Absolutely. Yeah.
mate in there.
Yeah. So again, like they are all related to the queen, who will
Right.
eventually produce more queens. So there is that. They are helping the queen produce more queens that will then go off and produce more colonies. So there is
Right.
some of their genetic material will go through that. So in the evolutionary sense of things, it does make some sense.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, giving up reproduction, like the ability to reproduce, is definitely not super common.
Yeah.
And I mean, aside for, again, in ants, bees, and then we have these naked rats, and there's probably some. I mean, and again, like there's not, a lot of animals who live. Like, there's a lot of mammals who live in societies, and some of them will also never get to reproduce. Like if you're in a kind of a group of wild dogs, not all there is usually a dominant pair who gets to produce offspring, and then others will kind of help and be babysitters and help bring food for the potential for maybe one day they'll become the dominant pair, right? Or you see that in birds too. You'll see there's parents that are nesting, and then offspring from previous seasons will stay and help. Like they'll help build a nest, they'll help bring food, and you're like, why are they doing that? And so for them, they're not sterile, and so they could potentially produce offspring in the next season or the next season. So they could be like learning how to take care of offspring. So it's kind of like babysitting to become better parents, or they could be like, oh, if I stay around this nest, if something happens to one of the parents, I already know the territory. I'm gonna probably be better off than someone who comes from afar and like might inherit this territory. So there's, again, in different species, there's different reasons to be like altruist or help others produce their young. Presumably, either you're gaining indirect benefits through direct benefits through actual like genes of yours through relatedness, or these indirect benefits of like, I'm learning to be a better parent. I might get this territory one day. I might, and then with ants, it just went all the way. It's just,
So what happens when what kind of changes do you see when, say, a queen? You said some queens are living like 40 years. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
My goodness,
Yeah.
That is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And cranking out workers or whatever that maybe have like a year lifespan or something like that. What changes in a given colony of, say, a given species when there's abundance versus scarcity?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, definitely see. So first of all, there is like kind of a developmental trajectory that happens when queens just start building a nest. They have very few workers, and over time they'll produce more and more until they reach some sort of maturity size. But then again, to last so long in a place where each year might be different, one year might be very rainy and you get a lot of seeds, one year might be very dry and you don't get a lot of seeds. There needs to be some regulation of how many ants you're able to produce based on the food that you have, how many you should be sending out to get food without losing them to the drought, and so on. And so it's basically all these feedbacks that happen kind of depending on what it is that we have, what it is that we're getting from the outside, and kind of this basically just adjusting to the situations depending on the cues that you get and the resources that are available. And these are all these kind of little small rules that we started our conversation with, right? So if you see that not enough ants are coming back with food, maybe today is not a good day to go out to search for food, maybe because it's too hard to find seeds. Maybe there's some lizard that's picking out all the ants. Maybe it's just really, really hot and they're just not making it back. And so, again, from long-term studies, there is this idea that colonies that are better at regulating their foraging, regulating their collective foraging, are better at lasting for longer because they'll do like more of these fine-tuned kind of in the moment regulation, whereas some might be like that. Like if the workers are not maybe in tune enough and like are not they're okay with getting fewer interactions before they leave. They'll maybe go and forage in not as good situations as other colonies. So then you start getting variation in the population between colonies that are kind of carefully regulating their foraging and ones that just always go all out. And maybe going all out is usually a good thing, but when there's a drought, you don't survive that year.
Right.
And so the genes of the ones that kind of carefully regulate their foraging might be better. And so the same, some like one of the ants that we study, they will actually move from nest to nest. So they'll have a certain nest and then they'll move to another nest site throughout the season. And so one of the things we think is happening is they'll kind of finish all the seeds here and start move to another place and start kind of checking out the seeds in that place. And so that's also kind of something that you could do throughout your life, even though we always think about ants of like staying in a certain place because they have their nest. They are able to move. Some species are able to move.
What kind of like bet hedging do you see out there? Because I think elephants do a bit of this with some of their herding and like not being reliant on one particular water source and such and I mean even a female mating with multiple well, maybe that's not the mechanism at work there. If different males have different. Some males have different traits for different types of ants, right?
Yeah.
Like different.
So I mean, genetic variation is a big thing, right? So if a queen mates with multiple males, she will produce different workers with different. I think you mentioned elephants in water holes, and maybe what you're alluding to is memory, because with elephants who are also very long lived, you have this situation where in drought years, there's some studies that show that groups with older matriarchs will be able to find these water holes that they rarely use, but groups whose matriarchs were poached or died for other reasons won't be able to find those rarely used water holes. And so in a drought, usually the older groups with older matriarchs usually do better. And so
because the information exists within the herd, and so if the information isn't there to convey, then
But then the question is, do we have long-term memory in ants? I don't know. I mean, if each worker is only living for a year, but the queen lives for 40 years, I mean, she's experienced a lot, but she's like stuck in this one, chamber, just popping out eggs all day long. I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. Where will the memory be deposited? I mean, one place it could be if they don't move between nests, it could be like in the nest structure itself. I don't know, part of their like extended phenotype and but it's a good question. I don't have an answer for you.
That's okay. What about could we actually explore the extended phenotype is definitely a level of complication up. I would say, and so it's always fascinating to have to hear different perspectives. But I think one of it seems like there's like trends of, in history of science and what gets popular to study and where there was so much effort into we say selfish gene. It was just like a clever book title, I think, more than what he actually like meant by that. But the selection at the level of the individual gene, and it seemed like it was like, well, it looks like we were fools about this group selection stuff all along, and then it seemed like over time that some of these kind of emergent selection patterns started to like reemerge again, which sort of it doesn't look dissimilar from group selection
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about group selection. I'm fine with that.
I would
Yeah.
just love to know like what
Yeah.
your take is and how
Yeah,
how, how
absolutely.
you think about selection at different
Levels.
different I guess it's just different levels of analysis, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think selection does happen at multiple levels of analysis, and kind of like we mentioned, what I mentioned before. If there's groups that do well by helping each other versus groups that don't do well because they're fighting, that is a type of group selection argument. Now, I think that there has been many things called group selection throughout the history of science. You know, and I think, we'll say, if you define it, then that is what it is for this conversation. But the idea that some groups will do better than other groups, or trait group selection is one of the names that has been used for this type of kind of argument. Again, is kind of a more inclusive way to think about the evolution of altruism, where kin selection would be like a special case of trait group selection, where individuals that are related to each other are nice to each other, and therefore their groups do better than groups of individuals that are not related to each other and fight with each other, and so they don't do as well. So that is kind of another kind of layer within the trait group selection. Whereas I think that current, the current trait group selection has the ability to kind of include these different types of selections that happen at other levels. But you need to be very careful about it because, there is the ancient group selection from the 60s where it was like, lemmings jump off the cliff because it's good for the species. That doesn't make any biological, logical sense. But the idea that there could be certain subsets of individuals for some reason or other that hang out together and kind of are nice to each other because they all have the same trait that is, being nice to each other could be something that's selected for. And then the idea, it's also that selection could happen at lower levels. Obviously, there's the individual selection where, the more offspring you have, the better you'll do, the longer you'll survive.
Right.
The more likely you'll produce, you'll leave genes around. So, sorry.
Oh no! It just seems like there is like system selection where you go if you had rather than putting this in ant terms. I get I could see it either way, but I would have a harder time explaining it. Say you had two groups of people on either side of a volcano that didn't know anything about how life worked really, or didn't have like a belief system and didn't know how volcanoes work. And one group gets convinced that the volcano goes off if you have sex or mate or whatever, because the volcano doesn't like babies. And then the other side says like, well, the volcano likes babies, so like if you have more babies, it won't go off and punish you. Both parties would be like wrong, but if you skipped forward a couple generations, the ones that were in the system that had the practice of like breed to stop this stimulus from happening. Right. Is the one that proliferates.
Yeah, evolution requires three things, right? It requires variation. So there needs to be some variation, like variation of beliefs, variation of behavior, variation of genes, whatever, variation of traits, variation of nest structures, extended phenotype. And then it needs to be somehow heritable. So there needs to be some way of actually transmitting that, whether it's DNA, whether it's cultural beliefs and history, whatever it is that is able to transmit it from one generation to the next is required as well. And then there is selective pressure, like the volcano erupting, or I don't know, or like, making more babies and them surviving for some reason. So these are the three components that need to work. And, when Darwin came up with these, he didn't know about DNA. He was like, there's something that allows these things to be passed down from one generation to the other. And it works regardless of whether it's the gene or, culture or whatever it is, as long as it is reliably transmitted from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
And so if you have this variation, heritability, and then a selective pressure, then you get evolution and you get certain phenotypes, lasting in the population, and those populations doing better than others. So,
what kind of what sort of things can we learn from something like ant colony, where you look at an individual ant and it's like, oh, this kind of,
yeah.
it doesn't seem like something that I could get all of this wisdom from or something. But I think of in terms of, I saw something about in studying, say, like pollination patterns of foraging patterns of bees, and they very quickly sort out the most efficient path to get to the best to the best sources, and you plug in similar I guess rules or motivations within within some modeling program, and it comes up with a path that is very it seems to parallel the efficiencies of that the bees stumbled on.
Right. Well, I think there is some assumption that things are efficient in biology, right? So, if bees get food or ants get food, they're probably trying to optimize how much work they did in order to get food, and optimize the amount of energy they get relative to the energy that they had to spend to get that. And so it's true that people have taken this idea and kind of used what ants and bees do. So there is it's called ant colony optimization algorithm in computer science that basically kind of does the same thing as ant foraging trails. So they'll basically, like the pheromones that the ants lay, the algorithm will kind of basically use the same positive feedback. So again, it's these kind of broader concepts of positive feedback and negative feedback, and that ants use, and then we can apply them to specific study cases, like to specific case uses. So like solving the traveling salesman problem has been kind of also, maybe we can use ants and see how they figure out the shortest paths between these different points and see if they can solve them. And some are very good at solving, like including Argentine ants. You'll, for example, put different resources and they'll find the shortest paths that connect these resources. And again, this is mostly very simple rules. If you found food, you're going to lay pheromones on the way back. If you didn't, you don't. And so they basically reinforce those trails that are more successful. Like if you were coming back from a successful source, you're going to, every ant that comes back from it is going to reinforce it. And the ants that are coming out of the nest will follow those pheromone trails. So you get these basically positive feedbacks. And once the food is out, the pheromone trail will become less and less strong, and it'll just dissipate, and that trail will disappear. So there's definitely those kind of rules that, one can kind of infer from, let's see what the ants are doing and see if it can help us in our engineering problems. Or another engineering problem that people have looked to social insects for, kind of robots, and having robots communicate with each other, and are like, okay, if we have a swarm of robots and we want them all to do things without us we could just program them all to, like, each one stand in the right place. But we could also give them individual rules that they follow, and they won't bump into each other, and they'll still create these patterns that we see, like in kind of in fish schools and bird flocks and ants walking around. One of the things that I worked a little bit is kind of looking at how ants interact with each other and try to infer from that how we might be able to improve our supply chains. So supply chain issues were a big problem during the pandemic. And ants also, they have to move these supplies from outside the nest to the inside of the nest. And they have all these workers that all need to get the food, and the food needs to reach the larvae and the queen inside the nest. And so how do they distribute the food from one to another in a presumably efficient way? And what happens when you disrupt them? And can we then learn about what happens when we disrupt supply chains, and the solutions that ants have come up with and have evolved over many millions of years to inspire kind of solutions in our supply chain. So that's just one example.
I mean, ants seem like such an interesting way to analyze for just statistical analysis, to understand probabilities of things a little bit. It eventually, I feel like, because they have the numbers, it takes a little bit of the randomness out of the system, whereas there's like, ant could have found the best food source, but then gets eaten by something on the way back or whatever. But they have enough numbers where, like, probably that food source and the best efficiency will over time be stumbled across. Whereas, like, look at something like a giraffe. It's like, that's just pure luck, you know, like that's just, I mean, there's not a lot to be gained in terms of, it's just such a small sample size, like what happened on that given day. In terms of like looking at a pattern of like transit or I don't know, information spread or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I mean, I think it's the ability to kind of harness others to do this, like to get something done. Because I mean, sure, there's not a lot of giraffe, but there's a lot of rats out there, and they're really good at finding food, and they don't work together necessarily. It's not like, oh, I found food, I'm going to call all my friends, and we'll have a whole like ratatouille party. But so there, you can still have lots of animals that are very successful because they're just like individually clever about finding resources, or they're just like their diet is not just tall trees. It's like anything they can find that doesn't kill them. But so I think there's different ways that animals have come up with solutions, and ants are just a cool solution that in which like a lot of parts are working together to achieve like bigger things, and being able to capture prey. So if you think about other kind of social systems where, for example, think of lions, right? If we're going to the savannah there, a single lion wouldn't be able to take down a buffalo on their own, but a group of lions can all collectively kill the buffalo, and then there's enough food for everyone there. So that's one, selective pressure for working together and collaborating on this big kind of hunt, because without it, you are going to go hungry, or you might eat a little, small antelope, which is also fine, but not as good as a big buffalo that you can share. So I think it's just a matter of, it's a lot of things.
Yeah, it's a lot of things going on.
A lot of things lead us to having so many different strategies and so many different animals.
Well, it's just also, I mean, I mean, listen, if I was talking to a raccoon researcher right now, I'd surely be trying to figure out a way to milk that information to my own benefit and how I can live my life in a better way or whatever. Yeah. But it's interesting that humans are so genetically homogenous in that, like, we share so many genes with one another. I think there's more genetic diversity in the, like, however many hundreds of orangutan. It used to be orangutan, and then someone started saying orangutan over time, and now I always get screwed up on which is the right one to say.
I'm not the expert on pronunciation at all.
It doesn't matter. But the point is in the whole species of orangutans, there is, that few hundred, there's so much more genetic diversity than all of the human population. Did you know? Maybe you didn't know that.
I don't read up on genetic diversity as frequently as I should.
You can take my word for
All
it.
right, I'll take your word
There
for
was
it.
a lot of founding effects in
Okay.
there,
All right,
and
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
the little
Yeah.
bit of incest along the
Yeah.
way, but because
All
of the constraints of
right.
availability
Mm-hmm.
when we were small, and so that's humans are just one of
Less diverse.
it makes us especially vulnerable to
Yeah.
pathogens and such.
Right. Right. Okay.
But but it does make me wonder if it has elicited
Yeah.
more cooperation
That's a good
along
question.
the way.
Yeah, that's an interesting hypothesis.
Yeah. Well, what about what do you think we could maybe learn from ants
Mhm.
about conveying about information
Right.
distribution?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think so. I like to think about that a lot. um, So I like to think about ants as kind of networks in many ways, in the sense that they themselves interact with one another. And as I said, like information needs to come in from the outside and be transmitted throughout the nest. And so whether it's information about food or danger, like how do we get an alarm to get distributed throughout the nest? There's different ways. You probably want to be pretty efficient about it. Like if you go and each individual, like someone bumped into an evil lizard outside, and are they going to go and like tell everyone like, listen, I saw a lizard, or are they going to probably emit some pheromone that is very volatile and can reach everyone really, really fast and be really efficient? So I think a lot of the questions that I think about is how do they communicate information to one another, and what can we learn from those patterns of communication? So when do we see like these one-on-one interactions? What situations will that be most efficient or beneficial for? Whereas when would we see these kind of higher order interactions where some message gets transmitted to everyone simultaneously? And of course, that also, it's not just information, it could also be pathogens, but then pathogens and information are transferred on different networks. So, for example, like information you can relay with pheromones, which are volatile, or with like antennal interactions. But for a pathogen to be transmitted, maybe you actually have to touch each other or exchange food. And so we have different types of interactions. We have like actual food exchange networks. We have antennal interactions. We have pheromones that just get spewed into the nest. And then on top of those like social interactions and social networks that we can like each individual ant is like a little dot in a network that's connected to whoever else she's around, and that can change over time. You also have this like other physical network in which they live, which is their nest, which is kind of like our rooms and corridors, or our cities where we have houses that are connected with streets. And so even if you do want to transmit a message to someone next to you or to everyone, the structure of the nest itself could influence how you can move that information. And so whether it's like one big chamber where everyone can like basically mingle with everyone, or a pheromone can be emitted and everyone will smell it, or if it's like lots and lots and lots of little chambers where you need to start like the information or food or disease or whatever needs to be to move through little tunnels into this chamber and these tunnels into this chamber. And so then you can start thinking about the social network that is acting within this spatial network of chambers and tunnels, and see how these two types of networks kind of interact. And then if you want to complicate it further, the ants control.
Always.
Okay, there. So the ants.
Not everyone's up for that.
We can go there. We'll go there. You can edit it out later.
Yeah.
But the ants can actually alter the network of the structure, right? Because they're the ones who are building the chambers and the tunnels and all that. So you have like this social network, you have the spatial network, and you have this feedback between them, because these social individuals are making the spatial space, but also the spatial space is influencing how they interact with each other. So
let me see if I could help people picture this a little bit. And I might be horribly inaccurate here, but let's say, so we're looking at a system, we're collecting data. So I'm staying with some friends in Venice Beach. I drove here to UCLA. Afterwards, I'll go to lunch. I need to stop by the Geek Squad to fix a computer. Maybe going to get some pickleball shoes today. Probably going to try to go and play some pickleball. Back to Venice. Maybe have dinner with them or so. So that's like where I went today. Each one of those locations is, say, a node, and we could put in like the time spent on in a location to like increase the size of the node or something like that to convey information. And then if you were to say draw a straight line to each of those, and you could see like over time how regular is this path, how often is he doing this, but then if you wanted to separate it, you go, okay, what of this was for work? What of this was for research? Later on he went and met up with some friends and went here for his social life. Here he went on a date over here.
If we want to do the connect, let's keep that. I like that analogy, that kind of idea that you're going with. And if we want to use that to kind of link the spatial and the social stuff, rather than, we can also go to like the different functions of what you're doing, but also just think of it spatially. Like when you go from here to Venice, there's lots of ways to do that. You can take the highway, you can take surface streets. But you can't drive through a building. I mean, you can try a building, but I don't think you want to.
People do. They take a whack at it once in a while. One of these days, someone's going to make it.
Yeah, maybe we'll fly over everything. But there's many ways you are constrained presumably by the roads that exist, right? Just like the ants are constrained, they can't walk through the dirt unless there's a tunnel.
Right.
So in one sense, there is this network of streets that you're going to be moving on, and which path you're going to move on, whether you're going to take the highway or surface streets, is going to depend on the society in which you live. And so if it's close to 5 o'clock, you're not going to take the highway because it's going to be jam-packed and it'll take you forever and it won't be very efficient.
Right.
So then you have this social kind of interacting with the spatial, where what other individuals are doing and kind of the cues that you're getting from others is going to change your own behavior, right? And also, like, you can control this because you can decide, oh, I'm going to come to UCLA at 10:30 when traffic isn't so bad, so I can take the more efficient route. So you can kind of control your spatial, kind of your social spatial environment by avoiding times that we kind of have prior information about. But it's very similar in the sense that you have space and it's connecting dots, but also you are kind of moving from place to place because you're connecting with other individuals in all these places.
Right.
And your connections with all these people depends on the spatial connectivity, and how many of these interactions, for example, you can fit in a day will be determined by how quickly you can get around, for example, right? You can't do maybe you would have wanted to do other things, but you can only, go to the Geek Squad and meet with your friends. Because if you also wanted to do, I don't know, well, you can still buy shoes as well, but maybe if you also wanted to go to a movie and go to a show and see a concert all in the same day, that's going to be hard, just because getting to all these places is going to take you time. So you kind of need to adjust your behavior and your planning according to the spatial and temporal constraints you have. And then you can shape your behavior and say, oh, I can actually be really efficient and meet some more people if I, make sure that they're close to each other spatially.
Right.
So if you have like a dinner with friends in Venice, and also you're going to go surfing with friends in Venice, that's both on the beach. You don't need to even go on the highway, or maybe not even any streets. You can maybe do that with a bike, and that might be much more efficient. And so you can be like, okay, I know, spatially, if I do these two, and these are two separate friends, you can still like interact with a lot of people because they're spatially connected. But if if you were connecting with the friends and surfing with the friends in Venice, but also wanting to meet some friends up in Hollywood, and you had to go, you had to meet them like at 5:30, you probably wouldn't be able to meet a whole lot of people if like every social interaction ended up being on the other side of town and you had to traverse it during rush hour. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm also to add more complication.
Yeah, you can add the different types if you want to.
Well, just because there's then to like evaluate how trade-offs then influence this overall system. So,
absolutely.
So here I am, this social ape. So let's see, in a lifetime, I'm going to want to survive. I'm going to want to affiliate, make some friends. I'm going to want to know where I'm at status wise in different situations. I'm going to need resources, avoid disease.
Yep.
I'm going to want to find a mate. Probably going to want to hold on to one as well, and then raise some children. So I have these kind of 7 different things this organism's after, and those are different. Being the social the mapping of the social behavior might track very differently than the mapping of the disease avoidance behavior, and sometimes the going to work and the finding a mate are 2 opposite directions, and then other people meet and marry their coworkers, and there's a lot of overlap there, and so.
And it changes over time, like over your lifetime. Maybe you're more concerned about meeting friends like in your 20s, but then in your 40s, you're like, well, now I have kids and I just am going to drive them around to their after school activities. And that's the people I'm going to meet.
So it's very easy to put all this together is what you're trying to say.
Exactly.
Well, I was, as we start wrapping up, I'm very interested. So we're kind of, talking about our social lives and social networks, and now our social networks changing seemingly pretty drastically with modernity. I mean, maybe it's always felt like a lot of change, but it seems like the internet's created connectivity that is certainly if it's like social connections used to be, it's certainly like it on steroids or something like that.
Absolutely.
And how you were kind of you had mentioned some in an email about kind of looking at some of the dispersal of food sharing in terms of the same as like potentially being able to share information.
Right. Yeah. So ants don't have email or social media, which is great. But also
that's why they're so productive.
There you go. So we are if we want to look at links between humans and ants and all that stuff. So we actually. That's why I like thinking about space so much, because animals need to be next to each other in order to interact. Of course, they can leave pheromones and kind of, a little bit of delayed interaction, but really they do need to be in the same place in order for an interaction to occur, because they don't have email or phones or any other thing like that. So basically thinking about the food transmission of ants is kind of a way to actually visualize it. And so one of the things that we do in our lab, and again, to get inspiration for supply chains and information flow and disease flow. So the Argentine ants that we study, as I mentioned earlier, they bring honeydew from the outside because they are hurting these aphids on the plants. And some of them will be the foragers, and a lot of them are just hanging out inside the nest, doing whatever, taking care of babies of the queen, or just sitting there waiting for food to come in. And foragers will come, and basically they're holding the honeydew in their abdomen, so basically their butts. And then when they come in, they transmit that food to others through regurgitation or trophallaxis, which is basically they puke up their food, and the other ants will come and kind of take that puke up and
nice warm meal.
Yeah, exactly. So we can basically look at this trophallaxis, this kind of sharing food through puking, and see how food is transmitted from the outside, and the ants that are coming from the outside throughout the nest. And again, we can, if we want to think about the relationship between space and transmission, we can actually manipulate what the nest structure looks like in our lab. So we can give them houses that look in different, nests that have different shapes, and say, okay, now we're going to give you food, and let's see how it gets transmitted throughout the nest, and whether the structure of the nest, whether having lots of chambers or one big chamber is going to influence these interactions. And then the other thing that we see is that, when ants do trophallaxis, it's not just one-on-one. It's not just one forager comes and pukes food into another. She'll basically kind of bring up the food, and you'll see like a little blob of food, and multiple ants can come and get the food simultaneously. And so that now starts to bring questions about efficiency at the colony level. Is it more efficient? So for the colony, you can think it's really efficient to do that, maybe because there's, the food. Each ant will get a little bit of food, but maybe from the ant's perspective that's taking up the food, she's going to get less because she has to share with all these other individuals that kind of mob this incoming forager and are now all sharing this one little blob. And also the forager, and the forager will have to go out faster to get more food because it's being offloaded quicker. So we can kind of start thinking about the efficiency of transmission depending on how many individuals get this food or information at the same time.
And this might work well from a bird's eye view because you're able to delegate. So one can go out and forage, the others can keep digging or something.
Yeah, right. So I mean, but also you can think if everyone had to go out and get food, that's also probably not very efficient because first of all, how are they even going to get out through the little opening altogether and come back? You can think about the crowding and the lines that form and the food places, but also the danger, right? The trade, we were talking about the trade-offs of just going out there and being exposed to predators and losing your way or whatever, or never even finding food and just wasting all this energy. So I think that's also part of the trade-offs where you don't want to send everyone out to bring food and have some that are doing other things or are just like hanging around and waiting their turn to be foragers or, taking turns who gets to go out. It again varies from species to species how they do that, but there's definitely some of that happening. So yes, I think those are all, and the other thing that you might say also, we're talking about food, and once an ant gives up all her food, she doesn't have any more food, and she needs to get more information. When I give you information, I don't lose it. So you can have different dynamics that are that we can use to simulate different things.
Well, that's what's so interesting about. The modern human predicament in some cases is the managing of abundance, and so as we've made information and the transmission of it cheaper and easier, it's suddenly like, what do you do when everyone's puking all of the time now? And now now you're swimming into it, and now you're trying to tease apart which trough is poison and what's actually healthy.
Absolutely, and actually, that's a really cool question that I've been. I think we'll try. I have some ideas on how, like when there's an alarm, right? So an ant gets alarm, and she comes in and she spews this like alarm pheromone, and everyone freaks out. But if you look at them, like if you look at the ants, they'll all freak out, and then they'll calm down. And how, like, why are they calming down? Like, if I blow some air on them, they'll freak out, and then they'll kind of stop. Is it because they all don't feel the air? Is it because someone is like, whoa, sure, things outside are crazy, but we're okay. You can calm down. Like maybe there's individual variation in how excited they get. Just individual variation in kind of the level to which they're ready to become excited at that moment. Maybe it's an inherent thing, like some ants are more chill. So what is it that makes them kind of recover from a crazy alarm of like, no, everything is bad, everything is horrible, run for your lives. But then there's this like, actually
homeostatic kind of rebalancing.
And I think that's a really cool question that we have some thoughts on, but I think there's still some open, and there's some ideas with like
it must be like there must be a little bit of a ramp vigilance up to this amount for X amount of time if nothing is like you're foraging for a threat essentially, and if nothing is found over X amount of time, then you dial down.
We can come
the
up with all sorts of rules
system.
and test them and see, and if there's some stop pheromone or stop aim, like yeah, we can come up with different rules and different potential explanations being hypotheses, and we can then test them and see what's consistent with them and what's not, and kind of that's the fun of things. And then we're like, oh, this worked or this didn't work in our system, but maybe it'll work in other systems, and then we can like, oh, actually ants do this way, so maybe if we want to stop things in humans, we can like, maybe have these like calming agents, or having these like people should keep looking for truth until they find it, things like that. So.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be opportunities for resets within the modern human environment.
Absolutely. So.
For sure. There's definitely a chronic ramping up that is
yep.
That we're having a hard
feedback.
time dialing down.
Right.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Thanks for sharing your time with me and the listeners. Pleasure. And let's do this again.
Awesome.
Great. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, more info to come real soon on a new show about the emergence of complexity and cooperation in our lives and the life around us. And August Knoxville, that's what we're aiming for right now. I have another science-based show that is also complex, I'll say. I don't know how related they are. A more history of science type stuff that I'm putting together, looking like Seattle, September, October, and so these are going to be the first of the couple new shows that I'm putting together, where I then figure out do a little trial and error in the first few shows and figure things out, and then build the whole massive tour around it. And then I'll spend a year or two traveling around to all over the place. My last tour was 170 cities or something like that. So I'm excited to get out there and meet all of you in person. Thanks for listening and or watching. Well, if you're just watching, no, just on mute. Just and or watching? What? That is not. Oh, I guess if there's closed captions, okay. All right. Okay. All right, we're making that make sense. Okay, guys, brass tacks here. Subscribe, follow, tell everyone you know. Sell all your belongings and pursue ant research or something like that. Let's build a cult together. Other calls to action. That's about it. Oh, join my email list. Social media. I don't know if you follow me on social media, you'll know that I just don't really post on there. In fact, I'm thinking about just deleting all of my socials. That's nothing. I don't have like a socials. It's just like not how I want to spend my time, and it's not a easy way to reach. It's a good way to reach people that don't know who you are, I suppose. It's not a great way to reach people that are like following you and interested in you. If I'm like, hey, I'm doing a show in Knoxville, and I put that on Instagram, if you're in Knoxville, the chance of you seeing that post is slim to none. And you're in Knoxville and you follow me. That's why an email list is so very important. The good news is I don't annoy people with it because I don't post enough. I really got to do a consistent, like monthly one or something, keep you up to date. That's going to be the goal for the rest of this year. Monthly newsletter. That's not so bad. Once a month, get to find out where I'm going to be, what tour stuff I'm putting together, when the special is going to come out. I should know by June. Do I keep on saying a month from now? For real, it's almost done. Oh my goodness. I just saw like second to last cut of it, and whew, it's amazing. Cannot wait. Show in Seattle coming up. Oh, Denver, the Psychedelic Science Conference this year in June, doing a Meow Wolf takeover. How did I forget to tell you guys about that? Meow Wolf takeover in Denver, doing a new psychedelic show and taking over the building for a hang, and it's going to be awesome. I hope that if you're going to that, you'll go to, it's the welcoming party for MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. And so you'll get to go there, hang out, meet friends before going around to the conference and hanging out with people. So do that. And that is, that's it. I'm doing some book fair in Crested Butte, Colorado, like a week after this comes out or something, but I don't really have any details, and I'm not sure if I'm doing a show or not. So more details soon on all of that. But this is the putting projects together phase of where I'm at right now. So touring in the fall, quite a lot more. All right. Thank you guys.